Hey guys, hope you're off to a great start to your week. I have been receiving a lot of questions about this Inflation Reduction Act that passed the Senate. And I just wanted to jump on real quick because we're actually working through our coverage of this bill that passed through the Senate this weekend. Has a really catchy title, a lot of questions around it. And as I was looking at some of the coverage, I thought, there's actually a lot to learn from here. And I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about what you're seeing and some of the questions that maybe we can be asking as well. So just to start off, let's just take a deep breath and pull way back from politics for a second. We'll add the politics back in, but let's just take a step back from politics and talk a little bit about inflation. We know that inflation matters because the higher the inflation, the less our dollar buys us, which is something that we don't want. We want our dollar to buy us just the right amount. We don't want it to buy us less, which is when you're in a high inflationary period. It does. Now, we expect to have some inflation in the economy. Most economists say around 2%. I expect to pay more for a gallon of milk than my mom paid for a gallon of milk because the economy has evolved. America has become a bigger economy. We've grown. So we do expect to see prices go up somewhat, but we don't want to see them in this sort of environment that we're in. And right now, our inflation reading shows inflation, 4 times that. So we're really in a high inflationary period. So one of the things to know about inflation, though, is that there's debates at the very highest level about what causes inflation. Yeah, we know a lot of different variables that could cause inflation. We know supply chain disruptions, for example, and high demand can cause inflation. But there's a lot of different things that cause inflation. And one of the things I don't think we talk about enough on the news is that even at the smartest of the smart people that know all about economic theory can debate about what causes inflation and what causes it to stay around. We're also in an economy that's constantly moving and evolving. We're all in our little constellations, our little communities, and we're participating in the economy as part of a broader galaxy. I'm not an astronomer, so hopefully this metaphor works. But we're making decisions on a regular basis that are affecting the broader economy as a whole, and we're doing this all the time. It's like the economy is living and breathing because we are. So it's tough sometimes to know the exact cause of inflation. And the reason why I mention that is because we don't know the exact cause of inflation all the time, depending on the economic cycle, then we don't have the exact solution. It's like a doctor. If you know what's causing someone to get sick, you can give them the exact medicine for it. But if you don't really know, then you might try a couple different things. And when it comes to economic policy, that's sort of the situation we're in right now, because there's also a question about how much economic policy, how single decisions can impact an inflationary environment. Again, if we knew what that silver bullet was, then we would just do it and we would just fix it. But that hasn't been the case in inflationary periods. We've tried a lot of different things, if you look back through history, to try to quell inflation. And yes, we eventually swing out of it, and then how we swing out of it and how that's done is later debated. So I want us to keep that in mind when we're looking at what lawmakers are doing when it comes to inflation. I think you should know that there's a real question about how much policy can really impact us. Now, there is a way that we do know is a variable for inflation that matters. Remember, we elect lawmakers for many reasons, but one of the reasons why we elect them is that they are in place to spend our money and tax us. Not the most fond way to think of lawmakers, but that's what they're doing. They're representing us in government, they're spending our money, and then they're taxing us. One of the things that lawmakers of both parties are guilty of is excessive spending. That's why we're in massive debt. And one of the things that has always been a question when it comes to stimulus plans, remember, stimulus plans can happen during financial crisis, they can happen during a 100-year pandemic, they can happen for really solid reasons. But one of the concerns about stimulus plans is that they can actually lead to inflation or add to inflation. A real simple way to think about this, and again, stimulus can happen at a lot of different levels of the economy, but if you have too much of something, of anything, too much mustard, too many strawberries, too many dollars, the value of that thing goes down. And so think about that when it comes to stimulus. If we're flooding the economy with stimulus, if we're flooding it with money, the value of our dollar can drop. And so while you're watching lawmakers debate the right way to tackle inflation, and you're watching economic policymakers do that as well, I just want you to keep in mind that there's all a little blame to go around when it comes to inflation. And so that's important to remember when we're looking at a bill called the Inflation Reduction Act. The Inflation Reduction Act is a spending bill that has been put forward by Democrats. This used to be the Build Back Better plan that you've likely heard about from the White House. It has a new name, Inflation Reduction Act, and we'll talk a little bit about the timing of that as well. But what does the Inflation Reduction Act do? And does it actually reduce inflation? That's a great question. One of the things that you should know about this bill is that although it passed the Senate, it still has to pass the House, which it will likely do for all intents and purposes on Friday and head to the president's desk. We know that because the House is majority Democrat. And yes, the Senate has a majority Democrat as well because the vice president serves as the tiebreaker. So the vice president casts a vote on Sunday, and that's what actually led the legislation to pass the Senate. But this is a spending bill. This is a spending bill, and one of the ways it was able to pass the Senate is that it was viewed as a budgetary bill. Otherwise, it would have had to go through additional processes that would probably have stopped it. So it's really important to know that this bill passed along party lines. And there's a lot of different ways that this bill is being interpreted right now. Here's the big takeaway. There's a nonpartisan source that basically scores legislation and tells us, like, how much is this going to cost us? What does this actually look like? And because of last minute changes to this bill, we don't have a final score yet on that from the congressional, from the CBO. So that's the Congressional Budget Office. I have to double check that. So we don't have a final score for the bill. So I can't tell you exactly what this nonpartisan entity is saying about it. What I want you to pay close attention to is language. So you're hearing a lot of language that is partisan that then is being repeated by the press. So for example, there's a lot of talk about this being a historic investment in climate change issues. But what's an investment to some is actually spending to others, right? So what's an investment to some that looks like good economic policy, some will criticize and say, well, that's actually excessive spending or excessive tax rebates that we don't necessarily want. What some are calling tax accountability for corporate America is actually raising taxes for certain people or certain businesses. So just be aware of the language that's being used and repeated, because there's always two sides for how economic policy is looked at. Right now, this is a bill that the Democrats support and the Republicans are completely against. But this is the bill that is going to pass. Timing really matters. The Inflation Reduction Act will pass before everybody kind of goes on their final recess as we go into the fall midterm period. And we know that the inflation and the economy are going to be really major issues for the midterms. So Democrats really want to make sure that this passed before that, and it looks like that's going to happen. Also really important, on Wednesday, we get some new inflation data. So once a month, we get a little report card on inflation, and it shows like what are consumers actually up against. So we're going to get some new data as well coming out this week. So this is all sort of percolating. It's all sort of moving together. I'm sure you're saying, well, just bottom line it for me. Like, is this good news or is this bad news? Like, how can we look at this bill? What I can tell you is what some economists are saying. So you have some leading economists like Mark Zandi, well-known economists, and who, I wouldn't necessarily call partisan in any which way. He describes this bill as leaning against inflation. So leaning against inflation, right? So some of the bigger names that are being quoted are saying, will this affect inflation tomorrow? Likely not, because spending bills are usually looked at over a 10-year period. So you're going to see certain things happen based on legislation over a course of a decade. So will something change everything right away? Doesn't necessarily look like that. You'll get others. I was looking at economist Jason Furman, who worked for the Obama administration, so you should know that. Obviously, Democrat administration that President Joe Biden also worked for. He was like, listen, it's basically, I'm summarizing what he said. Yeah, is it going to change things tomorrow? No, but like we expect inflation to be an issue for several years, so I'll take a win when we see it. So how will this play out is just as difficult as trying to predict the future. If you were looking at economic policy, let's say 5 years ago, you might put forward a spending bill and say, hey, this is the way it's going to play out, America, without thinking, oh, we could have that pandemic that shut down the entire economy, right? There was no way to anticipate that. So things can happen in the future that we can't anticipate that will affect the economy and therefore affect policies that we're passing. So I wish I had that crystal ball and I could tell you. I wish I could be more partisan and do, we could take tallies. Right now, I'm still working through the legislation. I want to pull out the key parts for you that I think you should know about. But obviously, there's going to be a real difference of opinion with such a straight party line vote on this. So just something to keep in mind. I hope this is helpful. And if you have any more questions, please let us know. We'll have more on smarternews.com. Have a great day.